I want to welcome everybody. My name is Dale Wallstrom. I'm the CEO of Life Science Alley and the BioBusiness Alliance of Minnesota. And we're really happy to see all of you here this afternoon, and we're really happy to welcome Dr. Shuren and his staff, who will be introduced in just a moment. I want to explain a little bit about what this trip is all about and why Dr. Shuren came and spent 2 days with us. The goal of the trip, we had basically two. One was to expose Dr. Shuren and his staff to some of the technology that our companies here in the greater Minnesota area are using to test and evaluate and improve products or submit for products for approval, rather. And the second is to lay a foundation for ongoing dialogue and discussion and to create an avenue for interaction that can be constructive and positive and working on the science of our industry. To do that, we arranged 2 days of visits, ranging from large companies, small companies, medium-sized companies, venture capitalists. The University of Minnesota played a large role in this. We again tried to touch on all components of our sector and to bring all of those folks or samples, certainly not all. We only scratched the surface of what our medical device and medical technology community has to offer, but nonetheless, we gave them a good showing and a good sample. So I want to give a special thank you to those companies and those individuals who took the time and the effort to open their back doors and let them see what's going on inside. I would like to say that to that second objective that we had, which was to try to establish a mechanism by which we could communicate and begin to build a different relationship or a stronger relationship. I am going to preliminarily announce a couple things today, or one thing rather, and that is that we have reached a tentative agreement to explore the creation of a public-private partnership focused on the advancement of regulatory science. And it probably doesn't mean much to some of you, but to others it will. What we mean by regulatory science is the tools, the methods, the technologies that are used to assess the safety, the effectiveness, the quality, and the performance of medical devices. And I think Dr. Shuren can, when he gets up here, will maybe touch on that and how that's being done in other industries and other areas, and we're going to try to emulate that here. So what does that really mean? What it means to us is the establishment of a process and a structure whereby our private, our academic, and our regulatory organizations can work collaboratively to facilitate the efficient and effective development and assessment of innovative medical products to bring these important technologies to our patients more quickly and at a lower cost. So this will be built out, this partnership and how it would be formed and how we would arrange it will be built out over the coming weeks and the coming months. I'll rely heavily on our relationship with our private sector companies getting involved and our academic institutions getting involved. And so we have a lot of work and a lot of dialogue to undertake to get that framed up. Dr. Shuren has agreed to provide us with some samples of how these kinds of things have worked in other industries, and that's exactly what we will be building on. So with that, I'm going to stop and turn this over to Dr. Shuren. But what the goal of this day, and the goal of this portion of this 2 days, is to allow you to have a chance to ask questions. This is a town hall format facilitated by Dr. Shuren and his staff. Strongly encourage you to be open and ask whatever you want to ask. This is intended to be a very informative next hour. In fact, we have to wrap up at about 4:45. So we have about 1 hour for this dialogue. So with that, I want to thank for the first time, and I'll do this again later, I want to thank Dr. Shuren and his staff for coming here and spending 2 days in Minnesota, getting to know who we are and what we do. And I'd like to welcome Dr. Shuren to the podium.
First, let me thank Dale and his colleagues over at Life Science Alley, who really put together a terrific 2 days for us, where we did have the opportunity to meet with several companies, colleagues over at the University of Minnesota, speak with a number of VCs, all in an opportunity for trying to establish a better dialogue with a focus around regulatory science, but we also spent time talking about some of the challenges facing industry, some of the challenges facing the agency, all focused on how can we bring important technologies to patients more quickly, more efficiently, and in a way that not only promotes the health of patients, but also the health of the industry. When I came to the Center for Devices back in September 2009, two things were immediately evident to me. There were a lot of concerns regarding our pre-market review programs. And we spent a fair bit of time working on two assessments on those programs. There was a lot of outreach to the public. We had put out two reports in August 2010 laying out here are what we think the underlying root causes. Here are recommendations for actions we should take. Got public comment on those, and in January announced several actions we were taking this year to improve the predictability, consistency, and transparency for pre-market review programs, and we followed that up with several announcements thereafter on additional actions we were taking this year. But the second thing that was fairly evident was the need for better interactions. And I'm not just talking the interactions, the one-offs on particular products moving through the process, but just broadly on interactions between the center and our stakeholders. And one of the things we had started were town hall meetings. A recognition that business as usual usually entailed that when there was an issue, you could all have the opportunity to come to Washington, D.C. and talk to us. So we might have a public meeting that was focused on an issue that we wanted to put out there, and if you wanted to come and talk, you were welcome to do so. We said, well, wait a minute. No, we should actually go out to everyone else and hear directly from them and talk about what's uppermost on their minds. So we started to hold a series of town halls. In fact, the very first one we held was right here in Minneapolis, because we know of how important Minneapolis and Minnesota generally is to industry and to VCs and to patients and academia, and so we came here first. This trip was to take it to the next level. So one is, yes, we can talk about anything. The second is, can we build closer relationships to have an ongoing engagement on common issues of interest to us? And what we focused on this time was regulatory science. Really, those tools and methods that can help bring products to market more quickly at lower costs. So, for example, one of the things that we talked about with companies, and companies were talking about with us, the work they're already doing on computer modeling. If you can develop a model of a part of the body, so for example, I can develop a model of the superficial femoral artery. I can talk about when I have blockage in there and I want to put in place a stent. If I can have an understanding of the anatomy and the flow dynamics, I can actually then design a stent using that modeling, test drive it, have a better understanding of it, save time and effort in its design, and not have to spend as much time, let's say, on preclinical testing. And that when I do it, it's far more directed. That allows me to develop that technology more quickly and at lower cost. That can be a game changer. We at FDA spend our time, part of our time, working on these regulatory science issues, but real success comes from collaboration between the agency, academia, and industry on developing those tools. The drug industry has invested a lot in regulatory science. We have had ongoing collaborations and several public-private partnerships that have been very successful. Something called the National Biomarker Consortium has been predominantly focused on drugs, and that's a relationship between industry, FDA, and NIH on identifying biomarkers and, more importantly, then qualifying them to make sure that, in fact, the results that we get we can depend upon. So as you know, if my endpoint used to be mortality, and instead I have a component of the blood I can measure, and I can actually get an answer and see an effect within months or even weeks as opposed to years, that is a game changer in the assessment of a technology. We'd like to replicate those kinds of arrangements here on the medical device side. To date, most of those engagements are one-offs. We have a number of projects underway with individual companies or a small set of companies and an academic institution. But to date, there is really no sustainable mechanism by which industry, academia, and the agency can get together, decide where we want to focus our interests, pool our resources, and move forward on those projects. And what we're talking about today is exploring that opportunity with the Minnesota community, for starters, and moving forward. So again, my thank you to Dale and to others for the past 2 days. Before I open it up, because we're really leaving this time for all of you to ask about or comment about anything that's uppermost on your minds, and to the extent we can, we'll be happy to talk about it. But before doing so, I wanted to let my colleagues each introduce themselves. Bill, you want to start?
Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Bill Mazel. I am the Deputy Director for Science in the Office of the Center Director and Chief Scientist at the Center for Devices and Radiological Health.
Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Joni Foy. I'm currently the Acting Deputy Director for Science and Regulatory Policy in the Office of Device Evaluation.
I'm Joel Michael West. I'm the Deputy Director of the Office of Science and Engineering Laboratories. This is the intramural lab for the center. Our primary responsibility is to support the review offices by helping to develop better methods for measuring safety infections.
I am Alberto Gutierrez. I'm the Director of the Office of In Vitro Diagnostics and Radiological Devices.
This is essentially your time. I guess the microphone is there. For anyone who, if there's a comment you want to make or a question, anything you want. Of course, people who have good party jokes, I'm always looking for a good joke. Please feel free to come up. And I guess if one of us is answering questions, probably better to come to the microphone.
I have a very simple question. I want you to, if you would, name 3 things that you learned in the past 2 days that you didn't know about.
One of the things that I can tell you that I learned about is all the work that a number of companies are already doing in the regulatory science space. And to me, that's very encouraging. Secondly, and related, is the interest from a number of companies in being willing to work with others and share what they've developed with other companies. And I think that kind of mindset and spirit is critical to the health of the medical device industry, that we can work together in what we call this pre-competitive space for the benefit of all. And third, I won't say, well, I'm going to cheat a little bit. It's something I knew, but it got reinforced more strongly, are the number of people in a variety of different quarters here in Minnesota who really want to have that kind of collaborative interaction with the agency, much as the agency would like to have that kind of interaction. And so I'm walking away personally, and I think I'm speaking on behalf of my colleagues here, with a very positive outlook from the meetings we've had in the past 2 days, and I'm utterly confident that many good things will come out of it, particularly since I have Dale driving things on the other side, and I've learned over the past 2 days he is a wonderful taskmaster. He assures we get to where we need to go on time and with lots of good humor. In fact, we're here today because of the fact that he ended up driving me to the airport back in April, and this 2-day event came out of a conversation we were having in the car on the way back.
I think one of the other messages, and again, I don't know that this is something we didn't know, but certainly was reinforced, is that to get an innovative device from market, it takes a lot of people, and there are a lot of steps along the way, ranging from the investment community to innovative thinkers and things that happen inside a company. The FDA certainly plays an important role, but even after the FDA, there's the reimbursement side, and there's a whole medical device development ecosystem of which we play a part, but the people in this room also play a very important part. And the only way we can strengthen that is from hearing about the issues that you're facing, and certainly that's one of the reasons we're here today, but we've also been going around. So So hearing both, specific anecdotes, but ideas that you might have about how we can strengthen the process. Certainly, we have a number of actions that we are taking in recognition of our own internal evaluations and feedback that we've received from going throughout the country. Many of you know earlier this year in January, we identified 25 actions we're taking in 2011 that are available on our website to try to increase our predictability and clarity about our expectations. But certainly we're open to hearing about other ways we can improve the process for you, both things that are directly within our control from the regulatory process, but also for other pieces of that, both on the reimbursement side and on the investment side.
Hi, I'm a reporter with Med City News. I have a bunch of questions, but I'll just ask one for now. VCs are not shy about how they feel about the FDA and how they feel that the slow process really hurts their portfolio companies. I'm sure you know that. What did you tell them in your meeting with them in the last 2 days?
Far and away, the most important thing that I continue to hear from VCs, number one, is better predictability. Timeliness is critical, and of course, what's being asked for should be appropriate and reasonable. Number one on that list is predictability. We are already engaged in a number of activities to improve predictability in our pre-market review programs. And these are actions we've already announced. Some of them are already in place. One is to clarify expectations at a high level for some of our programs. For example, we will be putting out draft guidance clarifying key aspects of the 510K program, and that will probably be out by the end of September. We are trying to build in greater clarity and predictability in how we make decision making. For example, how do we make a benefit-risk determination? What are the factors we take into account? And for the very first time, we will be putting out draft guidance that lays out those factors. For example, if I'm dealing with a serious illness, there are not alternative treatments available, you're going to tolerate a lot more risk. Patients tolerate a lot more risk in that circumstance. That changes the calculation. But we as a center have not been as consistent in the application of those factors as we should be. So the way we're dealing with it is you lay out the expectations through policy, and that's what the draft guidance will be. You'll build in the processes to make sure that you follow those processes, and you have the mechanisms then to monitor your actions. So in that guidance, we will also be putting out a template with key questions that we would expect our reviewers to answer as a part of their analysis and make that a part of the record. So everyone can see and talk about, here are the factors, here's how we took them into account and made a decision. Continuing along those lines for predictability, so one of the policies. Other policies are clarifying the criteria that we use in approving or not approving clinical trials. We're putting out policy, and this is all draft guidance for public comment, on opportunities for starting first-in-human studies earlier in the U.S. than had been permitted before, and to allow for a series of iterations in a technology without having to come back to get approval from the center. So you can test it, do a few patients, you want to make some changes, make those changes. Probably will be, you'll let us know about it, but doesn't mean there's a holdup, and then go make the changes, continue the assessment. And probably in the beginning build in what some hard stops would be. If certain things happen, well then maybe we've got to hold off, take a closer look. We have some people dying, that's a good indication that maybe we should see what's going on. But for a number of other things, maybe not. That, I think, builds in not only greater predictability, trying to create the incentives to start clinical studies here in the U.S. first. We'll be clarifying in terms of the use of data that's collected outside of the United States. There is a misperception that we do not accept data from outside the U.S. We do. But what's critical is that is data that is, meeting the standards for here in the U.S. One thing that I encourage any company is that if you're going to do a study outside the U.S. and you want to use it in support of a regulatory decision here in the U.S., come talk to us beforehand. so that at least hear what our thinking is, so you can best design it. Ultimately, your call, but if you take that into account up front, that can make a difference. Interestingly enough, ISO just put out their standard on good clinical practices, which is much more in alignment on the expectations that you have here in the U.S., and I think it's one of the first times you're seeing more of an international standard that beginning to align on clinical trials. We've been putting in processes in the center for assuring greater consistency in our decision making. So, for example, one of the concerns we had heard was that the center might ask for information that was not appropriate. We did an analysis of the times when we go back to companies on a 510K and we have follow-up questions. And we did find that in a number of cases, about 8% of the letters we sent out, so about 5-6% of the 510Ks on our look, we were asking for things we shouldn't have asked for. That should not happen. One of the ways we are handling this is if we ask for new information across a type of device, that question is being brought to a new mechanism we've established in the center called the Center Science Council. It is our senior managers, folks who are sitting up here or their bosses, and experienced scientists who then will hear about these questions, what the staff want to do. So those decisions not being made down at the reviewer level, being made at the senior levels within the center as to whether or not that's something we should do, and if we're doing it, have we appropriately applied the least burdensome principle? And if so, then we'll move forward, and that council has already been established. Those kinds of questions are already coming to the council. And I've considered it an exceptionally positive experience. We've had very well-informed dialogues, and sometimes the decisions have changed as a result of coming to the council. Then for other kinds of requests for new information, they will go to the appropriate level of management within the center, and those processes are going into place right now. And I think all of that, between policies and processes, start to build in that greater predictability. And that is just some of the things that we're doing. There are many, many more.
Appreciate again your willingness to come to Minnesota. I'm wondering if you could comment a little bit more about the public-private partnership and whether you're looking at doing this elsewhere in the country or if you're just piloting it here in Minnesota.
So as an agency, we've engaged in several public-private partnerships. As a center, we have done this on a large scale in some limited cases. The Medical Device Epidemiology Network that we established is a public-private partnership between us, academia, Opportunity for Industry, and others, where we are focused on developing innovative statistical methodology for assessing medical devices. Here, this kind of a partnership focused on a broader aspect of regulatory science would be a first for us with the medical device community. It is our hope that if this works well, that it could certainly be expanded either separately or it might be through the auspices here in Minnesota, reaching out to elsewhere in the country to other pockets of industry and to academia to expand the size of that partnership. And I think that's a discussion that we'll continue to have, but we are starting first here in Minnesota.
Dr. Sher, Pete McNerney, I'd like to welcome you here to Minnesota also and tell you how grateful I am that you've come with your team to reach out, especially to the investment community. My question is this. When we make investments and when a lot of these entrepreneurs form companies, they're focused very heavily in an area, a fairly narrow area of clinical expertise or science or engineering. And they spend a lot of time and effort becoming really smart in that area. And I think there's some frustration sometimes communicating that with FDA. Because, obviously we're conflicted, and you have to be careful with that. But it seems to me there ought to be a better mechanism for us to be able to sort of convey to you all the things we've learned. And sometimes we feel restricted in doing that by the sort of rules of the submissions, questions, responses. And I'm wondering what your thoughts on that are and whether there are programs underway to try to improve that?
I think there's a need for greater engagement. It's not just with the company, but it's also with the experts, other experts that are outside of the center. One of the steps that we are taking is creating what we're calling networks of experts, under a recognition that as a center in the past, our culture had been more insular. We tended to try to address issues just internally. And I think one of the things I found is, look, we don't have the expertise in-house to answer these questions. In particular, we're dealing with a new technology. We don't have experience with that technology. There are things we're going to learn from the company. As you mentioned, yes, there are conflicts, but you need to be aware of them. That doesn't mean you don't listen to people. But the second is we should then be reaching out to other experts who do have experience and relevant expertise to be able to ask them important scientific questions and get feedback. So we will be putting out, probably in September, draft standard operating procedures of sort of the rules of the road for us for engagement with those outside experts. And that will be out there for the public to review before we move ahead and finalize. And we're already starting those dialogues with a number of organizations to help us identify appropriate people and to enter into the kinds of agreements where we can then quickly tap into experts. And we'd identify conflicts, but that doesn't make it a barrier for discussion. What we have to be sensitive to is that as a matter of law, if we engage with people, and usually a group of people, in a way that would trigger requirements for advisory committees, then we would have to follow those legal requirements to have that kind of a discussion. The network of experts are for those circumstances where those requirements are not triggered. Then the other is, in terms of the interactions we have with companies, can we actually have, if you will, smarter interactions? For example, when we have a meeting, and we're kind of calling all the meetings before you send us something, send us the application, we're calling pre-submission meetings. So it could be before an ID, could be before the submission, and maybe even could be any of those. We will be putting out guidance to kind of clarify those meetings. What should your expectations be of the center? What would be our expectations of companies? When can you expect to have the meeting? So, for example, we should be giving advice, but we need to write down that advice, and we need to stand behind it unless the circumstances so change that the advice would change. You are talking about a device, you've changed the intended use, well, that might change the advice we would give you. But otherwise, we should be giving that advice and standing behind it so you have some more predictability about what our expectations are. At the same token, we'd expect some information from the company in advance so that we can have a well-informed discussion. Then there are those opportunities for more informal engagement through interactive review. We've started to do that with applications, but we've been rather inconsistent in its application. So there are some steps we're taking now to try to improve that with clarification on expectations for our people, an internal tracking system for our folks so that we're making sure people are supposed to have a certain kind of engagement, they're having that kind of engagement. But there are some changes that we may have to make in our user fee program regarding the goals so that we don't have barriers to those kinds of dialogues. So, for example, right now, when we go back to a company and say, let's talk about something, all of that happens on our clock. And there's no, if you will, little bit of give, if that is the case, as to what our performance may be. Then what's the cutoff, let's say? How much time do you allow for a back and forth before we say, all right, maybe this goes on the company's dime, if you will. Those are part of discussions we're having right now on user fee reauthorization. Then we've looked at opportunities where in some cases we may have that kind of engagement around a clinical trial. And with some companies we've done that. That in part becomes a resource issue for us, just having the ability and the time to do it. But if we can lay out expectations and we can do that, we find those kinds of engagements very positive and helpful. The network of experts is our opportunity to reach out to other people when the requirements for advisory committees are not triggered so that we can tap into people who do have an expertise we're missing, experience with a technology we may be missing. To make that work, though, we need to at least have a sufficient core expertise within the center so that you have the right experts talking to one another. And as I tell people, I'm a neurologist. You're not going to have me talking to the interventional cardiologist. I mean, I can, but it's not going to be the same kind of discussion as having my interventional cardiologist talking to the interventional cardiologist. We recognize we're never going to have all of the expertise necessary in-house. That makes no sense. But we at least need a sufficient cadre of experts. We can have the conversation, we can do the work, and then lastly, on the predictability side, we have enough so that those people can also spend time on developing guidance. Because right now they're conflicted. They get pulled away to do guidance. They're getting pulled from their pre-market review. And when they got too much on their plates, they're not going to spend much time on guidance at all. And that's been one of the hurdles for getting out more clarity through guidance.
I think it was last week in the paper locally here, it was announced that Boston Scientific was going to terminate the employment of about 1,200 people, and they were going to hire about 1,000 people in China. Now, I'm looking more for, I think, your observation than your area of expertise here, but I'm wondering what role, if any, you think the federal government should play in helping to make sure that this industry, the medical device industry, remains, that the United States remains the preeminent place in which where medical devices are produced in the world.
Well, in terms of, the role for the FDA is making sure we have predictable, consistent, transparent, and, timely processes in place. That's the role that we play, and that's as far as we can take it. Ultimately, decisions by companies, whether the jobs that they have here in the U.S. or jobs in other countries, is due to a lot of factors. And sometimes it's FDA that's a role. Sometimes it's for other reasons. And I've been having discussions with companies about that. And, interestingly, just the other week, had a discussion with a large company, and they said, there's some things for FDA, but we also want to be clear, regardless of what you do, we are going to be having people over in other countries, and let me tell you why. We want access to those local markets. That is business, and if you want to access them, you can't just have people here in the U.S. I need people by the local markets. I need to tap into their R&D processes. I need to tap into their experts. So I design products for that market, and then maybe I will move them over here, or I may design products in this market. I can move there, but I need boots on the ground over there. So regardless of what we do, companies are going to have more people overseas over time. That makes a lot of sense. What we want to make sure, though, is that we have as robust an ecosystem, medical device ecosystem here in the U.S. That requires some efforts on the part of the FDA, and we've announced what we think are a lot of actions to get us there. And if those aren't all the right actions or other things we should do, or some of them are completely wrong, we need to hear about that from you all and from others. But there are also other parts of that ecosystem that I think contribute as well. What happens with the markets, what happens on reimbursement. The opportunities to do clinical studies here in the U.S. isn't just a matter of FDA policy. The industry has raised issues sometimes with IRBs or the clinical infrastructure, the cost to do a study here, the same study here, versus doing that exact same study in another country, which may be factors outside of FDA's control. Those are other factors that go into a company's decision whether or not to hire people or to lay off people here in the U.S. But we think, at least for what's in the FDA's purview, there are actions that we're taking. And then finally, there are things industry can do, too. Making sure that when working with the FDA, you do come talk to us on expectations. I can't tell you that we have companies who either don't talk to us beforehand or they talk to us and they don't take our advice into consideration. In fact, PwC did a survey just last year, and they found that companies liked the meetings, but only 22% of them were taking our advice into account. That's a challenge. We do get submissions that are not of great quality. That eats up a lot of time of our resources. It wastes the company's time, wastes our time, but it pulls our time away from companies who are doing a good job. And so we are having discussions with representatives in industry about how can we change that balance. That's something else where industry, I think, can help. This work on regulatory science in the pre-competitive space can be a big deal here in the U.S. If the ability to develop and assess devices can be done more quickly and at lower cost. That makes the industry here in the U.S. far more robust. It makes R&D in the U.S. far more robust. And that's one of the reasons why, we had the discussion with Dale and why we want to see that kind of public-private partnership happen, because ultimately that can be a big game changer for industry.
Hi, Dr. Shern. Sue Danielson from 3M. Welcome to Minnesota. With regard to the development of regulatory science, we have a couple local universities who have specific master's programs in regulatory science. And we've talked quite a bit about what needs to be in the curriculum, what type of skill sets are we developing in the people who have to carry out these jobs. So can you speak to your thoughts around the agency reviewers and what you're trying to do there to really advance regulatory science?
We, for the first time, are going to be putting into effect a reviewer certification program that's going to start in September, where all of our new reviewers will be going through a series of required coursework and application review that didn't exist before. And we have a list of various functions and disciplines at the center that we are marching down, developing core competencies and assuring that people are trained and assessed on them, which is also being followed up with an experiential learning program where we will have our people going out to industry and to research facilities, resources permitting, because it takes them away from review, to see what goes out, if you will, in the real world. And that program will be up and running in 2012. And also, much like we're holding a town hall here and you're hearing from us, actually in a few weeks we are having people in from industry and the VC community for them to hold their town hall for us, for them to talk about their issues, perspectives, and then I will have my entire center sitting there and let them ask questions, hear things from the other side. From regulatory science, I'm going to turn over and let some of the other folks here maybe talk about the work that we do at the center, which is limited, but I do think has played a very important role in some of the work that we do. And I think in moving forward on, you kind of mix regulatory science and some of the training. One of the things we have proposed back as our innovation initiative was having here in the U.S. sort of a more established core curriculum for training in medical device development. And this came from a recognition of what occurred on the drug side. That many years ago, it was recognized that you need a pipeline for new people to come into the industry side of the house, and that's when pharmaceutical sciences developed. Here in the U.S., we've got pockets of programs that have been set up for training people in device development and assessment. But what we sort of suggested is, can we take this to the next level? Can we have sort of a common core curriculum that other institutions can then build off of and have much more of a foundation for the training of, if you will, the future innovators? That's not something for FDA to do. That's really not our purview. But we put it out there as we are happy to facilitate it to the extent that there's interest in what you need to know about FDA and what we do. We can provide those pieces. We do some of those training modules already. But we really look to academia and along with industry for sort of putting together that core curriculum. And I'd like to see that. Because I think if that happened, we would have more institutions engaging in this kind of work, training more people, and I think that feeds into the health of the industry. But let me turn to some of the folks here maybe to talk about some of our reg science work.
Well, I represent the Office of Science and Engineering Laboratories. So a big part of our job is to try to develop better tools in the regulatory science context to help the center and to help industry to be better able to bring products to the FDA and to have a better system for evaluating the safety and effectiveness. A good example, I think, is one of the things that we've spent a fair amount of time talking about over these last couple of days, and that's advancing the use of computational modeling in the development and evaluation of medical devices. This is one of those areas that I think kind of illustrates how we can have a positive effect in our laboratories. Because we're certainly not going to be building all of the models. We're not going to build the model and hand it to you and say, here's the model that you should use to evaluate this device. We participate in that process of developing the models, and I think that one of the things we've talked about is, as Dr. Shern was saying, in the pre-competitive space, trying to help facilitate pooling of some information like characteristics, tissue characteristics, anatomical characteristics, and so forth that can help advance these models. But the other area that is very important to us and that we think we can have a significant impact on is to help to identify how we can go about validating the models. Because it certainly doesn't do any good if you develop a system, develop a model, run it through some kind of process, and you've decided that it works, and then you bring it to us and we say, we're not so sure. So we need to work together to make sure that we agree on what it means for the model to be validated. That's one area that's, I think, sort of at the top of our consciousness right now. But in our laboratories, we have a broad spectrum of work in regulatory science, ranging from things in our Division of Biology, looking at things like infection control. We're looking at some of the medical devices involved in genomic work. We have a very big effort that we spent some time talking about here yesterday in the area of electromagnetic compatibility. So looking at how devices interact with each other and interfere with each other, and how we can measure that and prevent those kinds of things from happening. One area that cuts across a number of our divisions is to try to develop things like phantoms for evaluating imaging devices, ultrasound, optical devices, and these types of things. I could probably go on for some time, but rather than do that, I think I'd rather invite any of you that are interested to come and visit us in our labs, and I think you'd be pleased to see what you'd find. Probably much easier for us to collaborate with academic centers. And in those terms, just one example, we have an agreement with the National Science Foundation on a program that we call the Scholar in Residence Program, where individuals from universities first come and discuss with us the things that they might want to do in our laboratories, and then apply to NSF and get a grant so that they can spend some of their time working in our laboratories. We have some things that we're working on right now to try to develop more opportunities like that, using some of our resources to bring people from academia into the laboratories. We do also have collaborations with people in industry. We have to be a little bit more careful and make sure that we understand the boundaries and work out the rules. But through the CRADA mechanism, the Cooperative Research and Development Agreement mechanism, we can work on a number of things, again, generally in this pre-competitive space, where we're working on things that are broadly applicable to an industry, and staying away from working on specific products for a company, for example. But we have a number of things like that, and we're very interested in pursuing those opportunities.
So along the lines of the regulatory science that Joel was just speaking of, we've also taken some time to look into our crystal ball and to try to think about the type of technological challenges we'll be seeing and facing in the coming months and years, so that we can be better prepared for those things. And when we look at the horizon, there are certain types of products that we see coming, or certain types of changes. So one, for example, is the use environment. Where are medical devices used? The old paradigm of devices being in hospitals and healthcare facilities is clearly going away, or maybe not going away, but changing. There are many more home use products that are being used. The way devices communicate or are being used either wirelessly, via the internet. Physicians are interacting and patients are interacting with their devices in different ways. So that's one area where we see regulatory science can help strengthen our evaluation of products, and also help facilitate the evaluation of products. We've thought very carefully about how we can evaluate new and emerging technologies better. Dr. Shuren alluded to our network of experts, but also just getting access to the experts and the information that is out there. For truly innovative products, there may be only a handful of people in the world who really understand the technology, and so we don't want to limit our access to people who are one-offs, who may know someone who knows about the technology. We want to talk to the people who use it and breathe it, much to the point that you're making. The other types of patients that we are interested in seeing products designed for are special populations, such as the pediatric population. Many products are evaluated in a very homogeneous population, and we'd like to see products extended into women or evaluated in women, and that may be a place both where access to clinical trials is one area, but modeling can also help that. We'd like to see the use of these products extended out into different populations. So I think there are other areas as well, but just to give you a flavor for the type of areas that regulatory science can help, that's a few. And Alberto, maybe you can speak a little bit to the in vitro world and describe that a little bit.
No, I just want to say we actually have been in diagnostics is an area that has been growing tremendously quickly in the last 20 years, and the changes there have necessitated changes in the regulatory science along with that, and I think we have been in the forefront of defining what those changes need to be, what clinical trials need to look like, what is personalized medicine, and what are those clinical trials going to look like. We have actually been pretty much in the forefront of that. And or in other areas, for example, in multivariate index assays, which was a type of assay that began to come into market in around 2004. We've actually, the statisticians in our center have really defined what needs to be done, what needs to be looked at, and what are the pitfalls, and how does one do clinical trials that do not have bias and that truly represent a true look at the diagnostic. So that's an area that we have done quite a bit on. In the area of imaging, actually, is one that we and Joel didn't get into that, but his office actually has some of the world-class imaging group that helps us define. And it helps us in regulatory-wise because it helps us define what type of data, what are the confidence in the imaging that we see, what type of clinical trials need to be done or not done based on the data itself, and how do readers read the images, what are the crucial variables that we need to control, and so we are that's an area that we're in the forefront of really regulatory science.
Since one of our sister offices isn't here, and Dr. Shuren did mention the MD EpiNet, we should point out that in terms of developing tools in regulatory science, we have strong groups working on trying to develop better clinical trial designs, looking at other ways of making decisions, looking at better ways of using epidemiological data to look at post-market problems and so forth.
I have a question that's geared more towards regulatory application than regulatory science. Our company develops and manufactures and tests devices for other companies. And very consistently, these companies, the ones that ask the questions are the smaller companies. They're asking us about a testing methodology or a particular test or quantity. Could be a number of things. My answer is always, have you talked to regulatory FDA to see early what they're going to want, what's going to be acceptable for submission? The rule now is don't talk to the FDA early because you'll never get the same answer as when you submit. So it's become very inconsistent to the point where people aren't talking to you. And this is not a science issue, this is an application and trying to get just a consistency through the process from when a company starts development of a product to when it reaches your doors as a submission, they don't know what to do.
Well, certainly the issue of consistency is one that is very important to us, and I think our mantra would be, we believe you're better off, companies are better off talking to us, because we will provide our best available information and our thoughts about what the appropriate evaluation for the product is, and I still think that is the best approach. What we are doing, though, is we are instituting a quality program which hasn't been in place before, where we are going to be monitoring our consistency in the advice that we give, not just company to company, but within a single company's application process, so that if someone comes in during a pre-IDE meeting and then comes in the IDE, we need to be monitoring the consistency of our advice. We shouldn't be changing advice from a pre-IDE meeting to an IDE meeting, and we need to be consistent in that way. And so we will be monitoring that. The other place where we hear complaints is when reviewers change, and we do have staff turnover, or people go on vacation, or people retire. We shouldn't be doing a zig and a zag when that review team changes, or when people on that review team changes. And so we will be monitoring that and instituting policies so that there will be supervisory review of any proposed changes by the review team under those types of circumstances, so that we can be more consistent in the advice that we're giving.
Hi, Dr. Shuren. We've had a couple of comments regarding reviewer certification, and Dr. Mazzeo just talked about a quality program for consistency. Could you comment on a broader application of a quality system within the FDA, and whether or not FDA is utilizing more broad quality system concepts, and how they would be, for example, how would they audit themselves, how are they doing continuous improvement and those types of things?
So, and I'll just talk from the standpoint of the center. Actually, we've established a component for that under the Center Science Council. There's actually a group devoted to quality assurance. One of the things we're starting to put in place is putting on ourselves a responsibility that we've imposed on industry, and that's CAPA, corrective and preventive actions. So we are starting with our Office of Device Evaluation with a program and a tracking system for when problems arise, either we've identified or we've gotten a complaint from outside, that actually we are tracking that, we're looking into it, we're identifying our intervention, we're taking that intervention and we're monitoring, and we're also looking for trends. Are we seeing changes? And that's just one aspect of the kind of quality assurance program we're developing and will be putting in place.
I have to ask you about the IOM report. Looks like the industry and FDA has found common ground in that 510K cannot be eliminated, which is essentially what the IOM report conclusion was. Is there anything in the report specifically that you think can be applied when you finally develop changes to the 510Ks?
We had committed in the past, and we're living up to that commitment of having a public process for getting input on the report. And so we have opened a docket to receive written comments. We will be holding a public meeting in the fall to get feedback on the report. And let's have that discussion as to what's in it and what people think about it. And thereafter, if there are any recommendations that make sense to adopt in their current form, modified form, then we'll come out to the public and say what we think we should do and why. And our intent is to give at least some feedback on that report after the public process ends, probably by the end of October.
So nothing before you hear from industry?
Not just industry. I mean, any stakeholders. When we say the public, we mean everyone. We had heard from industry, we heard from others of, before you do anything, we happen to agree with this, make sure you allow an opportunity for input and feedback. And we think we agree and that's the right thing to do. So before further opining, we'd like to get that input. We did come out with the one comment on the 510K program simply to say we don't think it should be eliminated in its entirety, and that was based on our own assessment. And we certainly think that the 510K program does have a role. It's in need of some fine-tuning, and those are some of the actions that we already announced based upon public input that we had received. But we do appreciate, the IOM put together their thoughtful report, and right now, let's get feedback from the public and see where we go.
My question is about third-party reviewers. It just seems to us that you've got a lot on your plate. I'm sure you have budget constraints, and there's some very complex issues, personalized medicine, combination products, etc. Yet a lot of what you do, it seems, at least to me, to be administrative. Class 1 devices, amendments. Is there some thought to maybe having those more administrative tasks being done by third parties as opposed to FDA, freeing up some time and resources for you to focus on the complex?
And by administrative?
Requiring less what I would call clinical data, difficult scientific technical review. It's more, have you done the following, check the box, make sure everything's according to spec?
Well, I'd maybe put it as sort of, a good question. Are there things where we can make greater use of third-party review than we have to date? And actually, the opportunity for third-party review is there. It's a matter of, companies, do they want to take advantage of it or not? But there are some challenges for making that program work. And we actually did an assessment on the third-party review program, kind of looked at what was happening in 2010. And the data showed there were a lot of problems with the program as of right now. So where we were finding, and we have about 10 entities that do third-party review, where we had folks who were doing reviews and they really didn't have the proper expertise or training, or sometimes making decisions where they made the wrong call or didn't ask for things, and it was more because they didn't have access to information, confidential information that we had access to, that had they have known that, of what was going on with some other products, they would have approached it differently, or assuring that we've got the right kind of oversight. So we think the third-party program can work and work better, but it's going to require probably some greater investment in that program for it to work. And then it can take on some more of the lower risk devices that come to us for review. But I think that will take a little bit of time. Right now it's actually eating up a lot of our resources to oversee that program, and we have to do a lot of double checking on their reviews. So what happens is we expend a lot of time and effort, but we don't get user fees for third-party review. In fact, you wind up paying a somewhat higher fee to the third party who does the review, only for us to spend time having to look at it, and then when there are issues, that third party can become a go-between for us trying to get some of these issues addressed from the company. So that program does need some fixing, but if it gets fixed right and we have the resources to do that, that could potentially save to some extent. But that's one of the things that came out of our assessment.
Not about the third party in general, but and this comes to an assessment, we actually do look at our workload and tend to, from time to time, look to see whether we're adding anything to the process or not. And we do, when appropriate, down classify things that we shouldn't be looking at, or that there's no need for us to look at anymore. And we just went through, at least in my office, around that it's not quite finished, but deciding what is really the big issues that we need to deal, and that we have to assure safety and effectiveness, and what devices perhaps now are well known. There are plenty of controls that exist on them, and we're confident that a pre-market review may not be adding anything to the system. So we do that once in a while, and we do go through this process of down classification.
Just to because that is a great point. One of the challenges in down classification is that to do that, you go through a rulemaking process. It's actually very labor intensive for us to reduce, it's burdensome on us to reduce burden on others, which is somewhat counterintuitive, but that is required by law. We decided this time to do something a little bit different, which is we went out with a policy to exercise enforcement discretion. Basically is we won't enforce the requirements that are in play. So it kind of gets us to down classification in effect, but we still have to go through the rulemaking process to actually make it happen, which is a little counterintuitive. But that's one of our challenges on down classification. The other thing that we'll be moving to do, starting on a pilot basis in Alberto's office, and then maybe expand it to Joni's office, is a triage mechanism where we can start looking at applications coming in and deciding, you know what, this is also lower risk. We maybe don't need to spend so much attention and time and resources on it, and better manage where we put the resources in our review. So that is another component that we think for better managing where we spend our time and effort. That would be complementary to third-party review.
I'd like to offer a round of applause to our panel here for their before I close, I would also like to, I'm not sure who asked the question, Ruth Lane asked a question about 3 things that Dr. Sheridan learned. And I'd like to answer that, even though she didn't ask me that question. But because I think there are 3 things that that I picked up on that are important. One is I did not understand the need that the FDA has for support from us, meaning the industry, in regard to understanding in advance what science, what technology, what stuff is coming out and will become part of the product offerings in the future, and beginning to feed that information into specifically Joel's office and other areas, but specifically in the labs so they can begin to develop understanding of how to deal with that way in advance. That's one real important takeaway for me. The second was the need for translation. And there's no disrespect meant here, and it certainly is not clarity of message, but one thing that struck me through the course of the last 2 days was the need for translation of what is being said by the FDA into the community as far as these changes. And that's a role where, to Arundhati's question, that's a role that I think we can play as a community. If we can pull the right people from the private sector, pull the right people from the academic community, pull this consortium together, I think we can help with that translation process so that it becomes clearer and understanding becomes clearer as to where the agency's headed and why, specifically why. And then last, I guess I knew this, but the importance of I call it the lack of stickiness of this industry, meaning that this is an industry that is not dependent on our community, it's not dependent on our country for anything other than our knowledge, and to some extent our infrastructure, meaning our buildings and whatnot. But it's basically dependent on our knowledge. It's not dependent on raw materials, it's not dependent on water, it's not dependent on any of those things. So any community that anywhere in the world that develops the ability to have the knowledge to develop this kind of product is just as competitive as we are. So for us as a community, working in partnership with the entire ecosystem, which includes the FDA, includes our investment community, includes the whole works, is more critical today than ever before to try to make sure that we are the place where this knowledge infrastructure resides. So that's going to be a focus. So with that, I'm going to close with a whole bunch of thank yous because I need to. I want to thank, again, the companies that hosted us the last couple of days. I know that it was, I know there's a lot of dialogue behind the scene about just how much to show and how much from a confidentiality point of view you're willing to open up your doors and let in. And I think I really appreciate your openness, so it's fantastic. I also want to thank the University of Minnesota, especially Dr. Friedman, for hosting us for dinner last night, and the conversation we had around this collaboration was really outstanding. I want to thank the LSA BBAM staff. They're all sitting back in the corner back there. Hold up your hands. People have no idea how much work these people do behind the scenes to prepare for these kinds of things, so thank you. There's another group that I want to thank, and that's the Board of Directors. There's only a few people, I think. We have Ruth Lane here, we have Joe Gladowich, and we have Steve Mertens and Rob. And I just noticed, sorry. We have the Board of Directors for Life Science Alliance and the Biobusiness Alliance. I think Steve, especially as the chairman, is getting used to me calling in the middle of the night, kind of frantic, saying, "Steve, I want to do this, but I need your approval." And he says, "Okay, let's go." So anyway, thank you. There's a lot of work that goes on behind the scene, and we really appreciate that. I also want to thank specifically Senator Franken and his staff, Senator Klobuchar and her staff, and Representative Paulson and his staff, because they are diehard advocates for our industry, and they are doing everything they can to try to make sure it stays front and center and make sure that that the industry stays healthy. And I want to close by thanking Dr. Shuren, Dr. Meisel, Dr. Michael Butz, Dr. Foy, and Dr. Gutierrez. I have an appreciation for, I've developed a new appreciation for the level of activity you have in your life, because when we got out of one meeting, we would never be more than 2 steps out of the door, and they're all on their PDAs, staying in contact and answering information. So it's long, lonely rides usually for me between stop to stop. But anyway, seriously, thank all of you for coming. We are now going to, and I'm going to turn over to Liz and Ryan to, I think, facilitate a dialogue with some of the media if they'd like. We have just a few minutes to do that, but I want to close again, Dr. Shuren and the entire FDA staff, for you taking these 2 days to come here and explain and work with us. It was really, really great. So thank you very much. So, thank you all for coming.